see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Unites people. Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
If you want to stand out from everybody else, you need to get into storytelling.
Draw a different frame around the same set of circumstances and new pathways come into view.
Welcome to ARTEFACTLive with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of story. We don't care who you are, whether you're a bricklayer, a professor or a speaker, all we care about is you being a good storyteller.
Thank God the dramas arrived.
It's time to realise that facts tell, but it's stories that sell.
Get me some nasty and get it now or someone's getting shot.
And that's a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche. 1,000 comments.
Selling a hemorrhoid cream to someone who's got hemorrhoids.
Got a whip.
I was born into a deep contradiction.
This stuff's magic.
God, that's so clever.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to ARTEFACTLive, where we look at the art and science of storytelling with me, Scott MacArthur. Well, last week's show where we looked at Scotland's story, the grime and glory of Scotland, I was absolutely blown away with the response to that. I think we had about 15 different countries in the end tuned into the show, which was quite bizarre. Probably the most we've ever had, certainly on this show. So thanks very much. And I was particularly pleased that people said they'd never heard of Nan Shepherd or they'd never heard of the wonderful Henderson's poetry. So it was lovely to get the feedback from you all, and I do really appreciate it. Now this week we've got quite a different type of show, but I'm actually really excited about it because one of the things that I love to do is to learn from literature. And I don't know about you, I got stuck for a long time, maybe if I'm absolutely honest, 15 years reading nonsense. I was reading leadership books and management books, Simon Sinek and all this, but I think it's just fluff. And I finally realised that I wasn't wasting my time. There's some real wisdom in some of these books, but it really wasn't where the stories were. It really wasn't where the quality was. So not that long ago, I sold all of my management books, the whole lot of them, all the Guru books, all the Tony Robbins books, all the Simon Sinek books, all the Daniel Pink books. They're all gone. And I've really deeply immersed myself in what I call real story, which is about fiction and non-fiction, but biographies and classic stories. And this week, I'm so excited about this because this week we're looking at one of the greatest of all storytellers, as in Lewis Carroll. Now, I'm not a Lewis Carroll expert. However, we do have a Lewis Carroll expert coming out. You might say he's not, but I think he is. And he's an old friend of mine. And I'd just like to introduce you to Steve Folan. Here we go, Steve. I'll switch you on. There you are. Hello, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
It's lovely to see you. It's lovely to see you. Now, Steve, I've kind of given a brief, you can probably gather what I think of Lewis Carroll, but how on earth did you get into this in such a deep way? What is it about Lewis Carroll?
I got into it by accident. I was on holiday and there was I was in Whitby and Scarborough, and it just happens there was a couple of events. And then when I came back to London where I was working, there was a film show with Jonathan Miller, the director, talking about his work at the Lewis Carroll Society. So I went along to that and then attended a few things. And when I was in Scarborough, actually, I read the books aren't very long, and I read them both in a day. And I realized I'd never read them. That I thought I had, but I'd probably seen bits on Disney Time or something.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed with, the amount of action and ideas compressed into such a small book. And I realized it wasn't really a children's book. Then I got involved with the committee, and then bit by bit I've ended up doing different things, not just talks, but things like organizing art exhibitions, and actually one of the very first talks that I gave was, a little bit tongue in cheek, but it was about, the topic today, the influence of Lewis Carroll on modern management thinking.
Yeah.
Because a little bit like you, in my work, which is project management, technology, or whatever comes up, I'm always trying to look for interesting examples that make the problem and the solution more vivid for for the client, if you like. But
Yes.
with Lewis Carroll, there are so many different ways of telling that story. Apart from the stories themselves, there's the evolution of the story. Lots of people say, oh, it started in Oxford. Well, my take on it, and if we know about storytelling, it started when he was younger, when he was living up in Daresbury in the north of England. And now it's evolved into films, manga comics, virtual reality. There's treasure hunts that are going on.
Right.
And last year we were involved with the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now
Right.
they had a whole year-long exhibition, and when we were talking a little bit earlier, Chris Riddell has a new version of Through the Looking Glass out with new illustrations. So everybody keeps reinterpreting it either through the technology or through their own particular skills. And I just like to encourage it.
Why is it, do you think? I mean, Carroll's not alone. I mean, Tolkien's there, and there's some other writers that these stories just don't fade, do they? They continue to be part of the sort of the lexicon of reading that everybody has to read. What is it, do you think, about, before we get into the nitty-gritty of it? What do you, I mean, these are short books. Yeah, it's funny when you said, because we did a brief call, didn't we? And you said to me they were short books. And it's a long time since I'd looked at them myself, if I'm honest. So I went, because we have them in the house. Everybody's got them, really, haven't they? I mean, I've got 2 or 3. There's one of ours there. It's the sort of 3D model version, which is really cool. But what is it about these short books that you think has been so persistent, or has had such a long life? I mean, it really is something everywhere, isn't it? I mean, Carroll's work is everywhere. Why is that? Why do you think?
I mean, we just celebrated last year 150 years with Through the Looking Glass.
Gosh,
and I think that for such small books, it's the density of ideas. I mean, you've mentioned other authors. I mean, and like you, I've read lots of management books, and sometimes I can read through them and I kind of go, well, actually, there's only 1 or 2 ideas in it. But when you're going through Lewis Carroll, and there's and maybe other authors as well, as you go through the books, you just see lots of different things that you didn't think about before, the relationships that you never thought before, and there's an element of surprise and shock, and even the way they're constructed. Okay, one of the things I'll point out is that if you look at the books and you read it, take the first 3 chapters. Take the last 3 chapters at the end, but the middle 6 chapters you could put in any order, and it makes just as much sense, because you go into a completely different situation with different people saying different things, and he was, and the words as well, lots of his sayings, and we'll come on to it later, have become part of so he was a great person for language, for logic, for games, for puzzles, and that combination, and not just showing off how smart he is, but making you feel smart as well, is something that lots of other writers don't do. They make you feel that they're smart, but you don't, you don't understand it, and his language is easy to follow.
I think that's what caught me when I reread them this week. You and I, full disclosure, we've known each other a long time, haven't we? We've probably known each other 20 years now, because of we worked together. Then it's been 11 years since I came out of the corporate world, Steve. So it must be 20 years we've known each other. Yeah. And I think when I think back to life in the corporate world, it's quite complex a lot of the time. Sometimes it's too complex, over complex. And I think certainly when I reflected on reading the books again, I thought, this is really simple, but it's actually the simplicity is built on quite complex understanding, or quite deep, maybe that's a better word, deep understanding of human behavior. And there's almost, and I'm not a great Jungian reader, I'm not, I fell out with Jung at university when I discovered that he was basically crazy, but there are some, what he would call archetypes, aren't there, within Lewis Carroll's work, that I don't know what you think about that. I mean, I don't know anything about it really. I've only read them. I've never studied it like you have. But is that what helps? Is it the archetypes? You know, the Red Queen and the cat, or the whatever it is. What is it that, do you think, that helps us in the leadership world to really understand human behavior? Is it the archetypes?
I think that we're able to hook onto it. I mean, and if I use a concrete example, I mean, even from yesterday, when you're speaking with people, sometimes you're always looking for a pattern. You're trying to speak, with an issue, you're trying to refer to something else. So so particularly if I think about Lewis Carroll, one of my own kind of things is that I regard the Cheshire Cat as my idea of the bad modern management consultant.
All right. Right. Okay.
Going around making strange references, but what does he actually do? What does he contribute? And I'm the only one who's done it. But again, the books were before Freud. They were written, 10 years, 20 years before Freud was going on about the subconscious. But subsequently, people have made the same point as you. There's one version of it that Ralph Steadman he did the illustration for, and he was saying that when people read it, this is why they like, is that it feels like what someone's written down is their dreams, something that they've thought of, or it was at the back of their mind, but someone's actually captured it on paper.
Yes.
And a little bit about the stories, and I know a little bit he was jumping into the top, is that when Carroll was writing them, you've got to remember that he came from a background where he'd been involved with the church. There was only a few big institutions in the world back in the 1860s, and then he went to one of the other big institutions in the world, which was the university. Now, the sort of people, let's be honest, the sort of people who are attracted into that, it attracts a lot of eccentrics and eccentric behavior. So, and the people who are surrounding it as well. So a lot of it, I think he was just capturing, what he knew, but putting them into an entertaining scenario.
Right. Okay. Okay. So if let's look at some of the characters then, because there's one other question I wanted to ask you before we do that. How does a fella who's a project manager become, what is it, the chairman of the Lewis Carroll Society?
Society.
How did that happen?
I think almost, I would say, through a process of elimination. I think that the nature, you've known me for long enough that, I tend to be, even though you've got different types of managers and some can be very theoretical and a little bit of strategy goes a long way with me. And so once I was doing a few talks, I was organizing things as well. And I'm a big believer in using the books as a way of promoting literacy and culture. Even recently, I was saying that it's a gateway. There are so many artists and illustrators and other people who use it as a catalyst, and that's what I want. And so, because I'm trying to do that and open it up as well, so it's not really just to specialist literature people or academics. I work with people. There's a guy, the president of the society, Brian Sibley, funny enough, he's also involved with the Tolkien Society. And he adapted Lord of the Rings for BBC Radio. So we've got people.
So he did. Yes, of course. That's a fantastic interpretation as well.
He's a brilliant, so I work with him really closely.
Good grief. I didn't realise it was the same Brian Sibley. Obviously at the beginning of every episode it says his name. I didn't know it was the same fella. My goodness. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. That was a bit of a shock there. I didn't appreciate that.
No, I speak with Brian, WhatsApp him, quite regularly, and we're looking at, different things to do. So if I give an example, and I'm sort of a non-typical chairman of the society, if you like. Last year we did, we were talking about earlier on, a writing competition where we were encouraging people to write. Imagine there's a missing chapter, who would be in it, and we had entrants from all over the world.
Wow.
We had to whittle down the finalists. We had to create a special category for the under 10s because we never expected anyone who was under 10 to submit an entry. And the under 10-year-old even did pictures in her entry as well. It was quite, it was overwhelming. And Brian, and there was a couple of other people. One's a relative of Lewis Carroll, and another one is a lecturer at Kingston University. They're all hands-on. They got involved. They gave me lots of advice, and I like working with people like that. So so when you're doing things like that, very well, it's the difference between working with a group of motivated people, and if I'm using our business. Working with our business experience, working with a group of experts, who do it already. And so, we do lots of things. And even this year, we're trying to think of new things to do as well.
So can I ask you just to describe a couple of the entrances, the people that what sort of chapters did they write? What did they come up with?
The one who was under 10, her story was where Alice goes to school. And I'm still smiling about it now because I can see the pictures in it.
Yes.
And the teacher is the Mad Hatter. And the Hatter's giving her, is giving everyone's instructions to play up, behave badly.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, what a brilliant idea.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you got such a big response for the first thing. And the second thing I love about it is that, again, I didn't appreciate this until you described it to me, if I'm honest. I'm not going to pretend that I understood it as well as you do, but these middle chapters can be jumbled up, and therefore they can be open to interpretation and new stories. So are you going to publish these stories? I'd love to read them.
Well, honestly, yeah. I was speaking to someone. Actually, I emailed him today, but I spoke with him yesterday. A guy he's up in Scotland, and so he's looking to take the stories, put them into a book, and make an anthology of them. And he's a guy called Michael Everson. So we're in discussions with him at the moment. But he's done lots of translations of Alice in Wonderland. He's had it translated into Esperanto. Really? Into Latin, there's just, there's so much legs in this, in these two stories.
Yes.
And his background is in, cryptography and different languages. There was one guy who wrote to me because one time when I started up on the committee, I did the newsletter. And so, and whoever does a newsletter, can put their own stamp on it. But one guy, I don't know where I found him, but he did Alice in Wonderland using emojis. You think you've heard everything, but
Absolutely.
And the Alice thing crops up a lot in technology. It was the name of one of the original, maybe one of the Macintosh Apple type things as well.
Right.
And there's technology platforms that use it. And the guys at Bletchley Park were really into the Alice books. Alan Turing was, but also the guy who was the real brains behind the code breaking, who was a guy called Dilly Knox. They even put on their own sort of pantomimes at Bletchley Park using Alice in Wonderland, and they wrote it up. And
didn't know that.
one of the ladies who was on the committee of the Lewis Carroll Society many years before me was called Mavis Beatty, and she was a code breaker at Bletchley Park. There's something in the logic, the maths, the wordplay, that attracts cryptographers.
Right, very good. I would love to have a deeper conversation with you about that part of this story, but let's move it into the sort of the organizational piece that we've called the. How do we get into this then? How if I was a chief executive of an organization, why should I read the Alice books? What is it in there that's going to help me with my organization? What stories in there or characters in there are going to help me understand myself and the company better?
Yeah, one, I would say that it's like a business library itself. So you read them and you'll read them for enjoyment.
Yes.
And then if you stand back and you reflect on them, they're almost like, you know, business. When you read these business fable type books, they're like
Yes.
that, but better. You know, as you say there, the foundation's very simple,
Yes.
and yet the relationships are very complex.
Yes.
So I mean, if I describe, let's say the first book, okay,
Mhm.
if I'm describing it to the to a business executive, I would say the book, you know, could be a fable about an organization that was once very successful,
Mhm.
you know, but it's been going on for a very, very long time, and very little change has happened. You know, I mean, a lot of people will say, yeah, it's an example, you know, but no, at some point, you know, and this is my own personal viewpoint, you know, Alice in Wonderland is a functioning organization, you know, but it's not doing very well at the moment. But at the start, you can imagine that it was doing, you know, it was doing okay. And I, you
Yes.
know, and I know actually one of the slides that I gave you, you know,
Uh-huh.
there's a quote where it's saying that, you know, instead of reading The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker, you know, and
Yes.
I'll be honest, I love Peter Drucker. I think he's one of the best.
Yes.
His English is great. His
Yes.
ideas are timeless. You know, but you know, the world changes, and because it's, you know, it's unpredictable. You know, the Alice in Wonder story at a high level is a story about Alice who goes into this place where things are, you know, are very different to the world that she's leaving. And one of the challenges that they have in Wonderland is trying to
Mhm.
see how does she fit into their hierarchy. You know,
Mhm.
and again, I know that we've got the same experience. You know, I've gone into lots of organisations as a project manager, as a consultant, as whatever.
Yes.
A lot of the time, you know, I'm more like an antibody. You know, I'm a necessary antibody. And you know, with things that at the end of it, they'll be healthier, better, stronger, more resilient. You know, but
Yes.
they've got to deal with, you know, they've got to deal with the ideas. And I don't even assume that all my ideas are going to be right, but they've got to come up with the reasons why my ideas are wrong. And
Right.
you know, and some of them, you know, will be very effective. And Alice
Yes.
has the same challenge. You know, she's there. And if you think about the story, she's the only human being in the story, and they're
Yes.
trying to work out, you know, where does she sit in relation to all of the animals who can talk, you know, all the playing cards as well, and you
Yes.
know, they're all, you know, and you know, they're all giving her a bit of grief really because they you know, they've never seen a human before, and
Yes.
they don't know, you know, what to do with her or where to place her.
What one of the characters that I had obviously I'd forgotten about was the blue caterpillar.
Yeah.
Now let me just see if I think I've got your slide here. Let me make sure it's the right one. It's not that one. That one. It's this one. There we are. So there's the blue caterpillar. What's that about? How do you? I mean, forgive me for just landing this on you because I didn't say I was going to show this one. Just it intrigued me. What's the blue caterpillar about then for you?
I mean, for me,
Yeah.
when she meets him,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever's going on inside her head, she's having a bit of an identity crisis. I
Yes.
mean, you know, and I don't read the stories, but you know, she doesn't know whether she's Alice or Clara or someone else, but
Right.
she's saying things that are quite smart.
Yes.
Where she's saying things like, you know, I'm not the same person that I was yesterday. You know,
Yes.
which isn't a bad thing. You know, and so when she's having this quite complicated discussion, you know, with the caterpillar, you know, it is about, you know, who she is, you know, and you know, so when we're talking in an organizational context,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some of the themes that come up, you know, is about um, your identity, you know, your
Yeah.
personal identity, you know, the
Yes.
identity of the company, what's the
Mm-hmm.
brand, what's the reputation,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And I've worked for companies, you
Mm-hmm.
know, where we've, you know, and most of the companies actually that I think about that I worked with, you know, and I'll mention all the ones that I liked working with. You know, I mean, I worked with BP, for example, who I
Yes.
think, you know, who are a fantastic organization and do
Yes.
so many things right. And they really take care of their employees. And you
Yes.
know, and despite what people may think, you know, are really, you know, careful about, you know, about this, and with software companies as well. You know, when I was working with you know, some of the software companies,
Mm-hmm.
such as Nantucket Corporation and Fox Software, who are you won't know now. But they were really, they were newcomers on the block, and they were young and vibrant, and they really gave off to, and they did lots of things to, to support the image that they had in the market. So this whole brand, I mean, if you look at, say, Tom Peters, a lot of his work is about branding as well, and so, and so this thing, I mean, and actually, I do tend to segue a lot, so I'll apologise.
That's all right.
I mean, so even Lewis Carroll, when he was flogging the books, okay, he was one of the first people who included in his books pieces of paper, or bits of marketing to sell other books. So he was doing cross marketing, and even the Alice ideas. He was also producing things like Alice postage stamp cases and things like this. He was a real product marketer, before we had such things. It was, I'm trying to think of the right word. I mean, before, in those days when books were sold, they came in brown wrappers.
Yes.
So he was the first one to actually have a sleeve around his book, and he worked closely with Macmillan, who were still the publishers for the books. And there's even a book about his relationship. I mean, it's quite funny, his relationship with Macmillan, because remember, when he published, he was unknown. He was an Oxford don. So, in those days, you self-published, okay?
Yeah.
He was using his own money.
Yes. I didn't appreciate that.
What's that?
I didn't appreciate that, Steve. Didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, if the books hadn't been successful, I don't know what he would have done. He would have lost a bundle. I mean, he would have been serious. He would have been in serious trouble.
Right. Okay.
But he managed to get Sir John Tenniel, who was a well-known illustrator, to illustrate them, and not the first version, because he did his first set, and his first set of drawings he did himself, were pretty bad. You'd it would be like me and you having a go. It was okay, but it was, he was no John Tenniel.
Yeah.
And yet, when he was a bit more confident, he was, he would be there giving, Sir John Tenniel grief about, some of the drawings, and the publisher as well. So he was, his relationship with the publisher, he was, he would use it because when he liked to come up to London. One of the reasons why the books are the way they are is that Lewis Carroll liked the theatre. So, so he liked coming up to London, because if he was in Oxford and he was caught going to the theatre, that would be a bit of a no-no, as he was a reverend and in Oxford as well. So he would come up to London, we go to the theatre, and the Alice and the Looking Glass stories are very theatrical. They're like scenes from a play. And if I kind of give you a bit more, at one point he was trying to work with Sir Arthur Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan play of fame to get Alice in Wonderland put up on the theatre. But it never happened because they both couldn't agree on money. A lot of people will portray him as a kind of a saintly figure. He was quite, with all his marketing nous, I think that he had his head screwed on for business as well.
Right. Okay. Well, before we have a look at your artifacts, Steve, one final thing that I mean, obviously we'll come back to Alice, but what's your favourite character of all the characters? What's your favourite character and why?
I like the Queen of Hearts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, okay. Yes. And why? Why do you like Queen of Hearts?
There are lots of sympathetic characters, okay, so people can kind of go, Alice and blah. But the Queen of Hearts, if I reinterpret her, I mean, this is a woman who is in charge of a successful organization, okay, and gradually it's falling apart around her ears. She's got the playing cards who are painting roses that should have been painted the right color, and and she can't even, and even when she wants people's heads cut off, they never get cut off in the end, because the King of Hearts countermands her orders behind her back. So I feel a bit sorry for her.
Okay, excellent. I think we can both relate to some characters that we've met in the business world over the last few years. So I hope you're finding this as interesting as I am, and I think it's quite a lovely perspective. But just to remind you, you're watching Artefact Live with me, Scott MacArthur, with my guest, Steve Folan, where we're looking at the impact or the importance of the Lewis Carroll novels in the contemporary organisation. So let's have a little look at Steve's artefact.
It was my favorite thing in the entire world.
Right then. Oh, what do we have here?
So what you've got here, I'm just trying, is a picture of my dad that was drawn. Okay, and it's not that I'm particularly sentimental about him. I'll put it down now. It's actually because I don't keep that many artifacts, but this one we've kept, despite a couple of house moves and moving it from Birmingham. And when I see the picture, I actually know where he is when that picture was, it was taken from a photo, but he would have been in the pub in Birmingham where I spent obviously a lot of my youth. And both my parents were Irish. So when we were in Birmingham, I associated very much with storytelling. So I think I was mentioning earlier on that quite typically for an Irish person in Birmingham, the pub was like Facebook plus Twitter, multiplied to the power of 3. Okay. Everything, you got work there, you found a new job there, and you practice your storytelling there as well. You made up stories about yourself, you made up stories about everybody else, and you listen to everybody's stories as well. So if you're, so if I imagine like a Saturday or a Friday evening after we'd been paid, because my dad was a builder, people would be coming in from lots of different places where they'd be working. You wouldn't have seen people for a while. You want to know what they were working, where they were working, and they would tell you about their bosses. And if, for example, I used an example with my dad, even when I was older, I'd go back to Birmingham, we'd meet up, we'd go to a pub in Digbert or Borsal Heath, but for anyone who knows the area, very heavily Irish focused. And we'd sit down, we'd watch the football on the television, and the first topic of conversation from my dad would be the strange behaviour of the English people. Okay, and he lived in England for more than 50 years, and the topic would be how strange they were. And I just didn't want to tell him that, Dad, you're more Brummie than I am. And he would be, and he would just like saying, and they do this, they do that, I'd just be laughing inside, but then you'd meet other Irish guys as well.
Yes.
And they would just add more and more on top of it. That that the Birmingham person was a rare breed of person, and the things that they do and how different it was in Ireland, and it was just and I really and if you didn't have a story, the one thing is that you had to be a good story. So if you wanted to be drinking at all and be in company with anyone, you had to have your own set of stories and to be able to stick up for yourself. Because then when I went back to Ireland and I'd be with my other uncles, let's say in Kildare, a different part of Ireland, if there was 3 people, you would expect at least an argument. With 2 people, no, you just have a drink and a chat. With 3 people, you could have an argument because then 2 of you can gang up on one. And you could pick any topic. I can remember my Uncle Michael in Ireland, and I would be joining in an argument with him, and he would be just like arguing about where he was born. Okay, you'd think that you can't argue about that. He would argue about where he was born, in that the area might have changed the boundaries. So he was no longer born in Robertstown, he was born in Kyle Dove. Right. And the guy would be going, no, they didn't, where you born? He said, but they've changed it. So now I was born there, but now I'm born somewhere else because they've changed the boundaries. And I really don't know where, but then if you join, if one person's losing too much, then someone is expected to join the other side and then pick on you because you're doing too well. And the idea is to keep the argument going for as long as possible. And actually, because I was thinking about it a little bit before, because when I was in Birmingham, sometimes you would see someone who you didn't particularly like, and you would actually like to see them because you knew you'd have a really good argument with them when they came into the club. And I was thinking how poor Twitter is as a substitute for that type of argument, because you learned how to, because you would be arguing against someone who would be 20, 30 years older, with far more experience. And so you would have to be quick on your feet. You'd have to be respectful, because also if they'd also have 2 hands as well, so I could hit you around the side of the head if you were too cheeky. And so it was a far more engaging set of arguments you would have when you would just have on Twitter, which is quite generally quite childish compared to it. And I was thinking about it when you were saying that about the storytelling, and we did a lot. And another example I was thinking of, and the stories didn't have to make any sense. because you'd have to distinguish, between a rumor, because it wouldn't be gossip, but it had to be rumor. And I mean, for example, and this might not make me know, but on the building site, for example, I remember one time someone started this story. There was only one English person, I think, we had out of maybe 30 people working on this building project we had in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And he was obviously very senior, and he was some sort of architect. You never really asked. You did your work and you tried to not attract too much attention. But anyway, somebody started a story saying that so-and-so, let's say his name was James, had been going around asking everybody how much tax they paid. And obviously this was a very touchy subject. And so everybody would be there having breakfast in the morning, and then this story started. So the problem is that poor old James didn't know this. Anywhere he was walking around in the center of Birmingham, everybody would be disappearing to try and avoid him. And it wasn't true. Me and my brother didn't know this, and we were the youngest people probably who were part of the troupe. But everybody else would repeat it because it was such a great story. And it was such a good story that you couldn't waste it. It was, so there was a whole different attitude towards storytelling. And actually, when I compare it now to modern journalism, actually, we were quite good compared to because we were agnostic to whether it was true or not. It just had to be good fun.
Yes, you've really touched on, and that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that artifact. And I think everyone, if you're watching Steve there, you see how his face changed when he put the artifact down and started to tell the story. It's such a great example of how helpful artifacts are to help people remember stories and share their stories. It's a great example, Steve. So thank you for sharing it with me. But let's talk about the serious side of this. I mean, I worry. I don't know if you share this, I suspect you do, but I worry that particularly in a certain strata of people at the moment, we are afraid to have an argument. You are actually almost scared to say, I don't understand this, or I don't agree with that, or I'm unsure about that. Things seem to be polarizing a little bit. Well, quite a big bit, certainly amongst a certain strata, not with the general public, but a certain strata. Do you think that's because of social media, or have you any perspective on it?
I mean, it'd be too easy to blame it on social media.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think that there's a certain level of, let's have a look. I mean, my own take on it, there's a certain level of personal responsibility. So in the sort of work that we did before, if you're sort of grading some of the consultants, and obviously we both think that we were great. Of course. But one of the reasons, if like why we lasted so long doing what we did, is that I wasn't afraid to say, I really don't know. I'll go away, I'll read up about it, and what my skill was more coming up with and the reason why I got so much work doing it was that sometimes some of these new things, there isn't a ready-made solution. And actually, even the ready-made solution can be wrong. Because best practice is actually more common practice, and often it has to be customized. So I'm quite happy not understanding, and working with people who don't understand a subject, who will put in the hard work, to get their head around it, and come up with a new solution. So, and one of the things, and I will dismiss, lots of things, as you say, from that strata, is when I suspect that people are kind of taking an easy ride, and just going on received wisdom. And it's very easy, particularly in business, when there is so much material around, that you can say that best practice is, and then you don't have, I haven't had the epiphany that you have had and thrown away all of the management things, but I certainly kind of reduced my exposure to things like, and I hate to say it because I used to love it. It used to be gospel. The Harvard Business Review, for example. Because I think that some things can't be condensed to seven ways of doing anything or bullet points, and there is, and there's a kind of tension between good and bad. A tension between black and white, and you have to figure out that for yourself and to customize it, and to make it work. And the difference is making it, customizing it, and then putting in the effort to make it work, because a bad plan can be really successful,
Yes,
providing
indeed.
you make it work.
Yes.
A good plan, the perfect plan, can fail
Yes.
because you haven't put in the effort. And we've
Yes.
seen that in lots of things,
Dozens.
films, politics,
Mhm.
all over the place.
I used to say to my clients, and this I think very similar actually to what you've just said. I used to say that I didn't believe in best practice. All I would ever believe in was promising practice. So there may be something that you could learn from, that you could develop, you could use in your own context, but it's got to be developed to work in your context, or it just won't work. And it's certainly one of the things I learned about. One of the challenges of consulting certainly was that you can't lift and shift everything. You can't put a banking solution into a library, or a library solution into a retailer, or a retailer, etc. Just doesn't work.
Or sometimes you can. I mean, for example, Amazon, is exactly, and I mean, and then, but the challenge, the challenge I always thought was that there are too many pre-packaged solutions.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I even heard it yesterday, and then it's not even happening in the past. I was in a meeting yesterday where
Right.
someone was going through it and saying that, and I was, and I had to challenge them as gently as I could, to say that, yes, that you can do that, but you have to keep pushing the envelope. You're looking for standards, but you're looking to customize it, progress it, see what's relevant, take chances, because if we don't, then actually, going back to our Wonderland strategy, you end up in Wonderland when everything, looks quite good. But then if you look really hard, things, it's like a library where no new books, the same books have been there for 50 years, and no stock taking's been done, and no cleaning, and that's, but that's the challenge, and the challenge is, and it takes some energy to do it as well. Because then the challenge means that you look inwards and you look at your own prejudices, you look at your own favorite authors, you look at your default behaviors, and then you think, okay, should I modify them? Should I update them? Are they still relevant? And and it's quite, it's quite exhausting.
Yes. Well, let's give Steve a minute to think about the next part of the show, because this is the part of the show where we ask our guests to share their favorite story. Now, I have to be honest and say I love this part, because we've had so many different, a bit like the artifacts, but we've had so many great stories. So let's just give Steve a couple of minutes. And next up, we're going to hear what Steve's favorite story is. Right, now, let's have a look. Where's Steve gone? He's off to find his favorite story. Let's do it. So last week, I shared my favorite story, which was about Scotland. And I've had some amazing feedback about it. It was a different story. People hadn't heard the story before. And if you didn't watch last week, you can go onto YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/Scott MacArthur, and you'll see episodes 60, The Graham and Glory. So let's get Steve back on. Hello, Steve. So tell me, what's your favorite story, piece of music, poem, whatever it is? What's your favorite?
The favorite story is The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler.
Ah, right. Okay. Why is that?
I had to think a lot, because, like you, I read a lot around, the subject, but I love, I love Raymond Chandler. I've read everything he wrote. His style is fantastic. If more business and academic writers could write like Raymond Chandler, I might be motivated more to read them. And the Big Sleep is fantastic, and actually all of his stuff is fantastic. But the Big Sleep in particular, because it's actually it's a Knights of the Round Table story brought up to brought up to date. It's got morality in there, psychology, relationships. You get a sense of the time and place of Los Angeles. And he was, and he himself was an interesting, individual. At one time, Raymond Chandler, he went to Dulwich Grammar School.
Right.
Raymond Chandler in England. Yes. And he was an oil executive for a while.
Was he?
He wrote poetry. And 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 obviously, and he wrote a series of these books that were made into fantastic films with Humphrey Bogart, Elliot Gould, Robert Mitchum. They're just fantastic.
Fantastic.
Things to be involved with, and just like and the writing is compared. I mean, like the Alice story, is unpredictable as well. I mean, I like to read thrillers. I think that they are great ways to read about the sociology of time and place. And I mean, in modern authors, I mean, a Scottish author, I love Ian Rankin. I wait for every single Ian Rankin book to come out because Rebus is just a phenomenal invention and has evolved over time. And in Germany, there's a guy, Volker Bruch, who's written Babylon Berlin. They're just, and they're just the same. In England we had Philip Kerr, who wrote about books, a German detective, very similar to Raymond Chandler's Detective, set before, during, and after the Second World War. And what's great about these particular authors is not just the crime itself, which sometimes can be quite incidental, but it's the story they tell you about the people they meet, how they're reacting, and how they, and how they resolve it. And I just, I love the way that they write, and I think that even when I was, and I'm still, in the consult business, and when I try and write anything, a report or an analysis, I try and make it as direct and to the point, as these guys have done, and show, and show not just but also, how things could happen, what the options are,
Do you know, there's something that I've really enjoyed I hope you have the last 50 minutes now. I've really enjoyed it. But one thing really strikes me about you, Steve, is that you're very, very passionate about these stories. My final question, I guess, is how did you get that love of literature? Where did that come from? Because it's so clear when you really come alive when you talk about stories. Where did you get that from? Probably never been asked that. I don't think you've ever been asked that before.
No,
Where did you get it from?
I mean, it's something I can get back to my artifact as well. Funny enough, I mean, my mother, Irish. I mean, I'll generalize, but certainly all my relations over in Ireland, and even my brother, everybody reads. You're all expected, unless your job is, even bricklayers. I was going back to the storytelling thing. It wasn't unusual for us up on a Friday night and to, and even swap books. I mean, another book, which so many favourites, is a very popular one amongst builders, like the Ragged Trousered Philanthropist by Robert Tressel.
Right. Okay.
Have you ever heard of it? Read it?
I don't think I have. What's that about?
It's a socialist fable about a bunch of people who are decorating a house and their relationship and everything. I mean, I'm sure it's been put on as a play, but it's and I don't want to sound too intellectual. It's kind of like a Brechtian type thing, showing the relationships between the builders and the boss, someone becoming foreman, kind of a sort of Alan Bleasdale type thing before its time.
Right. Yes. Right. Okay. Okay.
Actually, going back to that, I mean, a guy talking about storytelling. There's a guy who's I think he's still alive. I mean, he was a labourer at the same time that I was working with my dad in the buildings in Birmingham, called Brendan O'Brien. I mean, he'll be so shocked, when I see him. I told him he lives on YouTube. Brendan, me and Brendan were competing hod carriers at the time.
Well, yeah.
And Brendan would be, and he'd turn up, and and there was no. I mean, Brendan was a great gossip. He was like an old woman gossiping about what was going on. But on the other hand, he was quite a scandalous person himself, and there was no scandal attached to him that you would not believe. There was nothing. And I mean, and sometimes I was, I remember, when you read these things in books, Brendan would go up to Doncaster for the Ascot with someone he met in a pub on a Friday night, and win at the races, and come back on Sunday and stop up at the Irish Centre in but the same guy as well, on a Friday, the Ragged Trousered Philanthropist was a book that he had in his pocket. you know, and
Oh,
even
right.
reading it, you know, and it's, you know, and it's involved, you know, and you know, and I'm trying not to stereotype kind of non-Irish people, but I
Yes.
expect them, you know, they're all generally literate, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my jokes was all, you know, all the best English people come from Ireland, you know, Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, you know,
Yes.
they were all Irish. All the best, you know,
Yeah.
all the best English writers are Irish.
Yes. I think we should have a chat about that some other time, because I've actually had a dialogue with a contemporary Scottish writer, Ewan Morrison, who does very well as an author, and him and I were actually musing on this about the Celtic nations and the impact that they've had on the British literary canon, and it is quite an interesting subject actually. And there's a great big why. I always think, you know, why is it that particularly Ireland has had such a successful
Ireland might have some. I mean, from a historical point of view,
yeah.
I'm not a historian. Going back to whenever it was, you know, the olden days, there was no literature in England, and
Yes.
it was all, you know, and it was all in Ireland. You know, all of
Right.
the monks and everyone were there, and you know, and kept all going. You know, sort of, you know, back in Roman time. So, you know, in Dublin, you've got the Carrolls and, you know, and all, you know, all of that stuff there. So all of that, the kind of thing that you see in The Name of the Rose was over in Ireland, you know, rather than in England, you know. So there's a big, you know, I mean, my dad comes from the west coast of Ireland, and you know, and believe you me, there's not many schools around. I mean, it was all farming. You know, it was, you know, in one generation, you know, we've gone from milking the cows and fishing on Galway to being involved in multimedia and technology and everything. And when you know, and we would be in, you know, when we're in Birmingham, you would get people who get all misty-eyed about, you know, going back to dear old Ireland. But you know, my dad's eyes would roll to the back of his head, you know, and wondered, you know, and he'd buy them another pint until they calmed down a little bit and stop singing. You know.
Well, on that note, Steve, I've got to say thank you very, very much for coming on the show, and I hope that in the near future we can have a pint, because it's been quite a long time. If people want to contact you or see your work, where would you prefer them to look for you? Where would they best find you?
If they want to contact me, stevefolan@gmail.com.
Fabulous. And of course, we've got the URL of the Lewis Carroll Society here at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you contact them, you know, then people contact me. You know, if it's relevant. You know, the secretary's really good, Brian Sibley. You know, it's a team effort, and you know, and they do a lot, and we're trying to do even more as well. It's been a bit hamstrung the pandemic side, but we've still done Zoom meetings every couple of months.
Right. Okay.
On different topics. You know, I mean, to give a bit of a plug, you know, I mean, last year we did a nonsense poetry evening.
Yes.
Where 10cc were mentioned, Spike Milligan, Edward Lear, you know, not just Lewis Carroll.
Yes, very good.
We had Alberto Manguel, who's a famous author, and he used, you know, and he's written his biography using a lot of the Lewis Carroll stuff as you know, as a structure. He's a really big fan of, you know, the work. He came on and did a lecture as well. And we're looking to do talks with people like the Flann O'Brien Society. We did last year. Fantastic, and got me into the Flann O'Brien books again. I never really read the first time. They seemed a bit weird to me the first time. I was a bit younger and I'm a bit smarter now.
Well,
and,
yeah, of course.
We're looking to, but this year we're looking to speak with the Oz Society, the Wizard of Oz people over in America, do something with them. And there's a guy called Guillermo Martinez who's written a couple of books. He translated into English. The first one was called The Oxford Murders. That was made into a film. Yeah. And so his second book is called something like the Gilded Murder, about a fictitious Lewis Carroll Society in Oxford. And people start to get bumped off, and it's to do with these missing pages from Lewis Carroll's diary. But it's, he's a great writer as well. A bit like Umberto Eco. These Latin American authors are really, they have an interesting spin on how you can do a thriller.
Fantastic. Umberto Eco is one of my personal favourites. So, Steve, that has been fabulous, and your enthusiasm for your subject is so obvious. It's just wonderful. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Thanks very much for your artifact was lovely, and I really appreciated that. And your your favourite story, the big. I mean, it's a classic story. So thank you very much for coming on, and I hope that we get to have that beer sometime soon. Thanks, Steve.
Me too. Take care. Cheers.
Cheers. So I hope you enjoyed that. Once again, I thought it was terrific. And wasn't it magic when Steve showed his artifact and off he went? It was just magic. I thought it was great. I'm going to look forward to watching that again myself, because that was terrific. So so where do we go next? How do we follow that? Well, next week the show is going to take another step. It's going to be different again. And I contacted this chap who's coming on next week a few months ago, but I've been following his work for a long time. And his name is Nick Askew. And Nick talks about, it's really, I'm really looking forward to it, because you'll have heard me talking about the poetry of David Whyte before, and how things sometimes don't need a structure. You just need to let them come towards you. And Nick is one of the most creative filmmakers I think I've ever seen and experienced. So I can't wait for next week. But he's going to have to do well to top the show we've had this week with the wonderful Steve Folan. What a show. Thanks again, Steve. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Artifact Live with me, Scott MacArthur.